Poyanami tamani tusi ilunasi. Good afternoon. Bonjour. Dungasugitsi ilunasi. Secretary General, Madam Chairperson, honorable elders, members of the Permanent Forum, chers délégués. I am here today as the Governor General of Canada, but also as someone born and raised in the Arctic. My presence in this role is not merely a personal milestone, it is a reaffirmation of Canada's commitments to reconciliation, self-determination, and implementation of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. The last time I spoke at the United Nations was around 40 years ago as the president of the Inuit Circumpolar Council. At that time, my work was guided by a clear purpose to affirm that Indigenous peoples have a legitimate and necessary place within the international system. We needed a voice at the table of nations to defend the very foundations that have allowed Indigenous peoples to live healthy lives for generations. We spoke of self-determination, essential to carrying responsibility for our environments and sustaining our food systems. We spoke of culture, inseparable from our deep relationship with the land and central to who we are. As everyone has spoken today, these foundations have been eroded by the legacy of colonialism, the root of many of the health challenges Indigenous peoples face today.
The health of Indigenous peoples is rooted in their culture and their self-determination.
Today, watching this room filled with Indigenous peoples from around the world, I am filled with hope as I see our voices continue to be heard through this forum and through the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. By committing to the declaration, countries like Canada made a promise that life for Indigenous peoples would improve. And in many ways, in Canada, it is improving. It's incremental and it's very slow sometimes, but we have to think about always moving forward. So when I look back on the many years that I've been involved, like you have been, we've experienced many changes in Canada, and in many ways we have moved forward. I have witnessed progress and a growing awareness among Canadians through national and regional efforts towards reconciliation.
Reconciliation is transforming our understanding of history and building new relations within our society.
But when it comes to health, lasting changes does not come only from investments in safe drinking water infrastructures or food security or livelihoods, essential as these are, nor does it come solely from sending non-Indigenous professionals into communities or from addressing racism and language barriers within existing healthcare systems. Enduring healing begins when support comes from within Indigenous communities, through culture, through belonging. Physical and mental health begin at home. All of this has to be supported by adequate infrastructure and services. In Iqaluit Nunavut, I sat with mental health practitioners, community workers, cultural healers, and caretakers doing remarkable work with very limited resources. They spoke of how powerful healing is when help comes from a peer, someone who speaks Inuktitut, who understands Inuit culture and knows the realities of life in the Arctic. Someone who understands that Inuit do not always work by appointment, that approaches like drop-in counseling or mobile mental health teams are often what works best. Someone who understands trauma and the enduring harm caused by residential schools and other colonial policies. In other words, healing is strongest when people connect with someone who understands who they are. Distinguished delegates, as you discuss Indigenous health in the days ahead, the question before you speaks to the very essence of decolonization. Beyond improving basic services, how can we support Indigenous people in leading the transformation of healthcare systems to reflect Indigenous perspectives? Comments?
How can we support the decolonization of healthcare systems?
I want to tell you a short story about a young woman I know from the Arctic. I met her recently. She's a medical student who is also already contributing to this transformation that I talk about. Her name is Madeline Yakov from my home region of Nunavik in Canada's Arctic. She had to leave her community at a young age because the science prerequisites required for university were not available at home. Despite the challenges of training in Montreal, Quebec, far from home, what drives her are the gaps she witnessed growing up. Gaps in access to care, and gaps in cultural and linguistic understanding. She remembers being 15 years old, sitting with a doctor who did not speak her language, nor did he speak English. There was no way to communicate. In that moment, she experienced more than an ineffective medical appointment. She experienced a system that could not fully see her. Today, Madeline is working to change that. She is promoting stronger connections between medical education and the realities of Nunavik. She is advocating for more Inuit to become doctors, not only to serve their communities, but also to transform the system from within. She returns home whenever she can, and she visits schools and youth programs and shares her story. And she hopes that when young people see her, they will think, this is possible. I can do this. That is the heart of it, possibility. If we are serious about supporting Indigenous leadership in health systems and ensuring care is rooted in culture, we must open the door to those possibilities, beginning with education.
Education is the key that unlocks all possibilities.
Education designed by Indigenous peoples for Indigenous students, grounded in Indigenous languages, knowledge, and realities. I am proud of the progress underway in Canada from the First Nations University of Canada in Regina, Saskatchewan, to the development of a new Inuit Nunangat University in the Arctic. It will be Canada's first university rooted in Inuit culture and language. These are major steps forward. They allow Indigenous youth to imagine and build meaningful futures without giving up who they are. They are also foundations of health. Progress on Indigenous rights is neither fast nor even, but it is real. It is happening in part because Indigenous voices are being heard within these walls as peoples and rights holders, people like yourselves. Those voices educate the world about Indigenous realities. They guide nations and they change lives. As we approach the 20th anniversary of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, we must ensure that Indigenous voices have their own seat at the table within the United Nations. Thank you very much. Merci. Nakormik.